stone, a leaf, an unfound door. Of a stone, a leaf, a door. And of all the forgotten faces, which of us has known his brother? Which of us has looked at father's heart? Which of us has not remained forever prison-pent? Which of us is not forever a stranger and alone? O waste of loss in the hot mazes, lost among bright stars on this most weary, unbright cinder, lost. O lost, and by the wind grieved, ghost, come back again.
Ball State Teachers College presents Approaches to a Novel. Your host for today is Dr. Paul Royalty, Chairman of the Department of English. He will be assisted by Dr. William Sutton, Dr. Joe Satterwhite, Dr. Alfred Marks, and Dr. David Shepard.
The young lady whom you've just seen on your screen is a Ball State student. She's doing something we very much approve. She's reading. We may not approve the way she is sitting. We may not even approve her chewing gum. But we do approve the fact that she's reading a good book. Bill, I think I'd like to ask you a question. Why is it important that people should read? Why can't people depend on the newspapers, the movies, the radio, the TV, and so forth for their information and their entertainment?
Well, each kind of medium has its own values. We can use television and the movies, for example, to give us visualizations of things that we couldn't see as easily ourselves, but the book has its values too. The book we can read any time we want to. If we want to read it at 5 o'clock in the morning, we can. If we want to read it at 1 o'clock in the morning, we can. If we want to read it on a train, we can. So it's ours. We control it. Furthermore, if we want to read it in 1935, we can. And if we want to read it again in 1955, we can. So we control it. It's ours to use and live with and operate as we want to. We don't have that control of other mediums.
Somebody did say that the great treasury of the world's thought and feeling is found in the granary of great books, that we can go to them at any time we want to. Furthermore, the author can put a great deal more of his life into a book because he has a longer time to create it. Could you comment on that?
Well, the book is going to be a longer experience. For example, this program will last a little over 20 minutes. A book can cram so much more, and it took me 4 or 5 hours perhaps to read the subject of our conversation today. And it's taken me a good deal longer than that to think about it and so on. In fact, I've been dealing with it for years. That you can't have in the more constricted medium of television or radio or the movie. So those are some elements that seem to me to recommend the idea of a book as an experience or as a base of experience. I don't think that books necessarily have better experiences or are better repositories than television can be, because I've seen some wonderful things on television like Hamlet and the various Shakespearean plays and so on. So it's just that this is a kind of convenient way of getting experience that can't always be gained in other ways.
When he was still 15, he had walked along a street in Baltimore and seen within a little shop smooth granite slabs of death, carved lambs and cherubim, and an angel poised upon cold Tisic feet with a smile of soft stone idiocy. As the boy looked at the big angel with the carved stipe of lily stalk, a cold and nameless excitement possessed him. The long fingers of his big hands closed. He felt that he wanted, more than anything in the world, to carve delicately with the chisel. He wanted to reach something dark and unspeakable in him into cold stone. He wanted to carve an angel's head. Oliver entered the shop and asked a big bearded man with a wooden mallet for a job. He became the stone cutter's apprentice. He worked in that dusty yard for 5 years. He became a stone cutter. When his apprenticeship was over, he had become a man. He never found it. He never learned to carve an angel's head. The dove, the lamb, the smooth-joined marble hands of death, and letters fair and fine, but not the angel. Remembering speechlessly, we seek the great forgotten language, the lost lane end into heaven, a stone, a leaf, a door, and where, when.
Joe and Al, glad you got in. We've just heard some reading from Wolfe's Look Homeward, Angel, and we were speaking about some of the requirements of a novel, and among those we had named, just before you came in, plot. I wish one of you would talk a little bit about the plot of this book.
Well, in many ways, some people have said that this book has no plot. They're probably wrong. In a way, of course, plot is really a falsification. Plot means taking the stuff of life and twisting it in some arbitrary way. It means, let us say, deciding that you're going to set up a story on the basis of, what happens when a young man meets a young woman and marries the young woman quite successfully. You bring relatives into it and complications of this kind. But basically, it falsifies life. This is why we say, when we see in something happen in life, we might say of it, it's just like a storybook. That's because the storybook existence is very uncommon in life. And in this story, we seem to have, on the one hand, a great deal of autobiographical material. We seem to show Wolfe's life from the time that he was born until the time that he was on his way to Harvard. It's because of this great plethora of autobiographical material in the book that it is sometimes said that the book has no plot.
Well, if a book has, if a book has no plot, maybe we ought to say that it has a theme. But before we go into that, then let's examine the meaning of the title, Look Homeward, Angel. I would like for somebody to speak on that point.
Well, I have been quite interested in the title, and I've been intrigued to find that it didn't have one title, it had four, all of which are very, very relevant to the theme of the book. The first title that it had was The Building of a Wall, and I think that the theme of separation in the book is very appropriate to that. And then for a while he was calling it Alone, and I think it proves two things to mention that. This is a quotation from what he calls in a letter from which I'm reading, my favorite poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And the quotation is, alone, alone, all alone, alone on a wide, wide sea. And never a saint took pity on my soul in agony. And then for months after that he was calling it, Oh, Lost, which is, again, the separation notion, which is everywhere in the book and is in other things that he has written. And finally, he called it, as we obviously see, Look Homeward, Angel, which is a quotation from Milton's Lycidas, which I might remind you is a funeral elegy and therefore dealing with lostness and all that sort of thing. The full quotation we need is, Look homeward, angel, and melt with ruth, meaning melt with pity, and that's exactly what he was doing.
Well, it seems to me that you suggest a good deal of symbolism, and before we go on then with other aspects of it, could somebody speak out of that symbolism a little more specifically?
The epigraph to the novel that you've heard Dave read acts as the chief symbolic pattern in the novel. It becomes almost a lyric refrain, Al, that runs through the novel. It's repeated, I believe, 15 or 16 times. Let me remind you of some of the things that Dave read. The line goes like this: a stone, a leaf, an unfound door, and all the forgotten faces. Naked and alone we came into exile. Which of us has known his brother? Which of us has looked into his father's heart? Which of us has not remained forever prison pent? Now, to really understand the symbolism, one has to see that this is a novel of alienation and isolation. What the novel says is that every individual comes into the world and is alone. And the action of the novel is the attempt of the protagonist to break down this barrier between himself and others, to communicate with others and to be understood by them. Now, as I understand the symbolism of the novel, the stone and the leaf refer to those agencies by which characters in fairy stories gain entree. For example, many of you will remember that in many fairy stories, the third son, dispossessed, comes into the forest, finds the leaf on the magic tree, turns it or presses it, the chasm opens, and he finds the treasure. And in the same way, a stone may be the key to treasure. The door itself, of course, is quite obvious.
Joe, our time's going so rapidly. I wish you'd say something about what you think the theme is, because it thinks very closely allied to what you've been saying,
Well,
and then we'll go on to something else.
Bill has made it clear. Perhaps I can
Well, he
add
spoke
something.
the title. I wish you would be a little bit more specific.
Well, I
about
think
the
it's
theme.
a novel that deals with the chief theme of modern fiction. That is the fact that each one of us is essentially isolated. We're not understood by others, and we can in no way establish communication with others. This, it seems to me, is the theme of the novel, sir.
What I was wondering about if this would come in under symbolism or under theme, this constant preoccupation with death and this preoccupation with tuberculosis. The characters in the boarding house, even the reference in this, in the beginning passage refers to these tisic feet, rather strange word for tubercular. It runs all through these characters and all through the novel. And is it just there for its own sake or what?
Well, he couldn't escape it. Ironically, it's why tuberculosis had killed him, you know. But I don't think he is as preoccupied with death as he is with life. In fact, I'd like to say that I see him looking on this life that he's examining with revulsion and attraction at the same time. And I don't think he is thinking at the time he writes this book of dying at all, although he, I mean, of his own dying, because he was a very young man. But I don't feel that the book has a preoccupation with death. I think he sees it as part of the scheme of life, but not only that.
Well, Bill, I'm going to have to interrupt you again. You did mention character, and I think we must not leave this book until we've talked about the characters and the deftness and the depth and so forth, the penetration with which they're conceived and drawn. And I'd like to call on another member of our panel, someone at least.
Well, there are any number of wonderful characterizations in it. Going back to what I was saying about plot. The basic falsification in the novel, the basic rearrangement and selection of material in it that makes it a plot and not autobiography, is the fact that the story runs parallel with the life of his brother Ben and the life of his father. Ben dies a few chapters before the end. The father is dying at the end of the novel. And it is this falsification I feel that's so important, and the characters of the two men, in which Ben, the stranger, always lost, always feeling that he has the world figured out. His favorite expression is, "Oh, come on now," or "Listen to that, will you?" He's got it all figured out. Then, on the other hand, the father who throws himself into life, constantly looking for something, never finding it. These two men run parallel with Wolfe, and I feel that somehow these two characterizations are perhaps the basic characterizations in the book, outside of the mother, who is always throwing things off. She's always spoiling life.
Do you think any of these characters become grotesque? Wolfe sometimes over-exaggerates, and, well, with Eliza, I think there are certain passages where she's rather grotesque. I mean, the complete antithesis of the stereotype mother. I mean, we think of the grade school Whistler's mother is invariably on the wall. She is not Whistler's mother.
Well, Whistler's mother's a grotesque, too.
Well, in an opposite way.
Dave, apropos of this, it seems to me that one of the ironies of the novel is that the home, which should be the place where we're best understood and where we can make ourselves best understood, the home in this novel is a place where no one is understood, and it becomes grotesque. For example, I was impressed by the fact that Eugene's mother is so interested in the dollar that she can turn her home into a boarding house and fill it with strangers. And it seems to me one of the surest devices by which Wolfe creates the atmosphere of alienation is the fact that no one has a home in this novel.
Well, it's a complete inversion of the stereotyped home, I suppose we might call it the great American myth.
Did he create these characters with his eye upon them? Do you think there is a great deal of family autobiography as well as individual?
Unquestionably. Unquestionably. He says he's created a city in the book. I think he means that figuratively and actually. Of course, as you probably know, there was a great deal of reaction to the book on the part of the citizens of Asheville, North Carolina, which was where he lived and which was recognizably referred to in the book. But I don't think he was trying to create a person or a group, but a whole cosmos.
I think you get an answer to this question, why read a novel? I don't think many of us have either the time or the inclination to dissect the people we know. But you got this tremendous array of characters in this novel. I imagine they're on the streets of Muncie.
Are they drawn with a great deal of feeling? Do they, as well as brilliance?
I think so. Even the doctor, and certainly the doctors are parodied here. One of the doctors says, "Well, I saw Ben dying at 4 o'clock in the morning down in the Greasy Spoon. He had a cigarette in one hand and a donut in the other." They put the boys out to work.
One grants that every novel is autobiographical. I would like to point out one aspect of art which I think we have up to this point ignored. Granted that Eliza and W.O. Gant are pictures of Eugene's parents, it still seems to me that Wolfe has done us this service. He has made these two characters represent the two polar views toward life which disqualify them from understanding their families. Eliza is a real estate woman. She's after the dollar. She's a complete materialist. W.O. Gant on the other side, who is already an old man when his son is born, is consumed with the feeling that the world is passing him by, and he becomes committed to a frantic search for life, which forces him to ignore his son. They are true to life, and they are distortions of life.
Are they rather universalized, though?
I believe so. They represent the two polar extremes, which disqualifies for understanding our fellows.
They also represent the two polar extremes of Wolfe's personality, because on the one hand he was dedicated to art, but he always hoped his book would earn $1 million.
Well, now listen, I've heard that word art twice. What are the art of this book? I think possibly some people read it as a work of art rather than as a study of life. Particularly, it's
well, art has no other preoccupation.
Well, I'm thinking of the lyricism of the book, the language, the mere style of the thing. Who would like to speak of that?
Well, I think as far as style is concerned, this gets back to plot, because I'm not certain whether we could say the book has a plot or it has a pattern.
Well, Dave, the thing I have in mind is that I heard a critic one time say that this book, of all books, is a prose poem, that Wolfe is our poet in prose. You're a speech man. Why don't you try to give us some idea of that?
I think that could be defended very easily. Let's take the book first from this standpoint, that there are a number of poems in it, a number of lyrics. Well, chapter 8, for example, begins with a passage in which Wolfe explores the smells of chalk, the smells of food. We have a series of sense impressions, and it works into a lyric. And by lyric we mean the poet writes whatever comes into his mind, whatever takes his fancy. No attention especially to the rules of logic, simply these subjective passages. Well, that's what I mean by the lyric.
Yes.
And we have a pattern of these lyrics through the book. Chapter 8, chapter 9, the traditional lyric ode, when Proserpine comes back and Ceres' dead heart rekindles, getting back
well,
to
not only the language, I think, but the fashion of the thing. Did you find a passage, Bill? Did you want to read there?
Well, I just wanted to read a line because I want to contrast it with something else. The kind of thing you've been talking about is exemplified well by this. The day was like gold and sapphires. There was a swift flash and sparkle, intangible and multifarious, like sunlight on roughened water, and it just goes on from there with a tremendous passion for what he's experienced. On the other hand, the book has very rough and difficult to take satirical passages which just skin whole chunks off people, and they are reasoned. So he has tremendous reactions of both reason and emotion.
Well, you people all teach literature. Did you find yourselves in the satire of the English class?
I saw my colleague.
Oh.
The satire, it seems to me, is a form of the art of the novel. One of the things Eugene is concerned with, as every maturing boy must be concerned with, is the discrepancy between what things appear to be and what they really are. And these satiric passages, it seems to me, fulfill this function very well. One of the most impressive chapters is a chapter in which Eugene is on his way home from school and sees various facets of the community. And in each case, a beautifully satiric line of poetry from his school reading suggests itself to him. This I consider to be a very fine piece of art in the novel.
One other idea about the art, people have, of course, called it chaotic, an onrush that violates all sense of the art form. Anybody want to speak on that just quickly or not? Or do you not feel that that's true?
Well, the onrush is part of the pattern. The onrush is life, and this is the important thing about it. He says at one point that he is trying to portray, or he talks about the beauty, the mystery, and the tragedy of life. And I think it's here that you have the sadness of the book, the mystery of the book, and the beauty of the book all combined. So what he's trying to do all at the same time.
Certainly Wolfe is a very conscious artist. he had studied the other writers, and he was very well aware of the techniques. He did write almost in a passion, as he says, I wrote this in honesty and with joy and with pain, and I was going to read this, but I don't think I better try. But his whole soul went into it, but it certainly wasn't an unconscious soul.
Dr. Royalty, I think it'd be a mistake to conclude without pointing out that the novel does resolve some of the difficulties which it posits. Many critics have accused the novel of having no pattern. It seems to me that what the protagonist does come to see is that he must cease to concern himself with others and fall to learning himself. Near the end of the novel, he says this to himself: "O sudden and impalpable fawn, lost in the thickets of myself, I will hunt you until you cease to haunt my eyes with hunger. I shall lift no stone, I shall turn no leaf in the forest, but in the city of myself, upon the continent of my soul, I shall find the forgotten language." I think critics too seldom give Wolfe the credit he deserves as a plotter.
Let's pull this together for our listeners. Let's more or less review the accomplishments of the novel. Now, what, one by one perhaps, what outstanding thing do you think is accomplished?
Well, I think it illustrates a beautiful epic structure. Many of these chapters can be lifted out bodily. They'll stand by themselves, but the novel will not stand without them. I mean, all of these lyric odes do something. All right, you mentioned W.O. and Eliza. In one of the lyric odes, Gant's reactions, his sensitivity to nature is described. In on page 68, I think it is, page 127, excuse me, Eliza reaction. She reacts to the city as a blueprint.
Well, maybe
dollars and cents.
Maybe so that's all the time you have, Dave. Anybody else, right? Quickly, we don't have much time.
Well, I'm interested in the fury of its approach to life. This is an adolescent, and a lot of people call it an adolescent book for this reason. I find in most recently reading it again that it still shows me the fury of approach to life and the way in which life itself can be somehow captured in all its unrushing madness.
You think it has a validity and maturity that a lot of people don't see in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a rich, passionate book which will help anybody who reads it carefully to see his own life more clearly.
Well, perhaps we ought to come back to another passage or a repetition of that first passage there, Dave, that you read before.
A stone, a leaf, an unfound door. Of a stone, a leaf, a door, and of all the forgotten faces. Naked and alone we came into exile. In her dark womb we did not know our mother's face. From the prison of her flesh shall we come into the unspeakable and incommunicable prison of this earth. Which of us has known his brother? Which of us has looked into his father's heart? Which of us has not remained forever prison-pent? Which of us is not forever a stranger and alone? O waste of loss in the hot mazes, lost among bright stars on this most weary, unbright cinder, lost. Remembering speechlessly, we seek the great forgotten language, the lost lane end into heaven, a stone, a leaf, an unfound door. Where? When? O lost and by the wind grieved ghost, come back again.
Thank you, gentlemen. Here are the bulletin board items for this week. A special convocation featuring the English film version of Shakespeare's Hamlet will be presented tomorrow at 2 p.m. in Assembly Hall. The movie, starring Laurence Olivier and Gene Simmons, has won 5 Academy Awards. It is 2 hours and 45 minutes long, so come expecting to enjoy the afternoon as guests of Ball State Teachers College. More than 200 teachers and school administrators in 130 Indiana high schools are scheduled to come to Ball State for an all-day workshop on Friday, January 18th. They are coming to participate in the Ball State Public Relations Conference. The conference will include the role that the school plays in conducting its public relations program. Anyone who is interested is invited to attend this workshop, which will be conducted by representatives of the schools, newspapers, radio stations, and by nationally prominent speakers. The Ball State freshman basketball team will play the Purdue Extension basketball team this coming Saturday in the Cardinal Gymnasium. This preliminary game that starts at 5:45 will be the first time that you've had a chance to see Jimmy Barnes of Muncie Central and Larry Perry of Burris in action together on the same team. Immediately after the preliminary game, the varsity team will take the floor against St. Joe. Ball State has one of the best varsity basketball teams that we've seen in years. Tom Dodds, Wayne Van Sickle, and Jim Harris all are scoring at better than 14 points a game. Terry Scher and Muncie's own Carl Miller are fast, hard-driving guards that are always keeping the pressure on their opponents. St. Joe will be trying to stop the Ball State winning streak at 6 in a row. On the other hand, the Cards will be trying to retain first place in the Indiana Collegiate Conference standings. They'll be upping their overall record to 9 wins against only 2 losses. Ball State will also be host to Franklin College on Tuesday, January 22nd. The Ball State faculty is working hard to complete the arrangements for the annual Eastern Indiana Teachers Conference. Approximately 2,500 teachers will be coming to Ball State campus on February the 2nd to participate in this important conference. There will be 67 discussion groups covering virtually all areas of the school curriculum. As many as 600 persons will be on hand to act as consultants and panel members to provide leadership for the teachers. The annual Eastern Indiana Teachers Conference is just another way in which Ball State makes available its personnel and facilities to help improve the education that your child is getting. Thus, we are better serving you and your community. You are invited to join us next week at this same time when Ball State presents 3 Men on a Harp, or 7 Keys to Anything.
This is WLBC TV, Channel 49 in Muncie. Stay tuned now for Comedy Time.